Welcome back. Today we're here in Dover, Delaware at another stop at the First State National Park. This stop happens to be John Dickinson's plantation, as you can see behind me. But before we get started, make sure you smash that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It helps get this content out to more viewers. Now follow us. We are here at John Dickinson's plantation, just outside Dover, Delaware. This is part of the First State National Park, which includes 6 total sites, which tell the story of Delaware and sites important to Delaware being the first state. This episode will be the first one of a series diving into the history of Delaware. It was here on these very grounds one of the least known founding fathers spent his formative years, John Dickinson. This was a 13,000-acre plantation located in Kent County, Delaware, along the St. Johns River, which was much closer to the property in the 1700s and led to the Delaware Bay. Just walking from the visitor center where we watched a quick video on John Dickinson, now heading up to the house to do a tour. Learned a few things in the video. Before I came here, I knew very little of John Dickinson. Learned a little bit more. Still don't know a ton, but basically one of the reasons why John Dickinson isn't as well known as your, George Washington, John Adams, he declined to sign the Declaration of Independence. Not that he didn't want independence, he just thought we weren't ready at the time. But he wasn't one to want to stand in the way of his fellow countrymen. So he just abstained instead of objected. So once the Declaration was signed, he did everything in his power to help out. He was an important penman of many documents, and he also signed the Constitution. So let's head up and tour the house. I don't know if I'll be allowed video. If not, hopefully I'll be able to take pictures and share them with you. Follow us. It is right here in front of me, Poplar Hall, the Georgian mansion built by Samuel Dickinson between 1739 and 1740 in Kent County, Delaware, south of Dover. For the sake of this episode, we're going to focus on John Dickinson, the penman of the Revolution, and his political career, and the famous documents John Dickinson wrote that helped forge this country and made him one of the most important founding fathers you may have never heard of.
Hello, welcome to the John Dickinson Plantation. Welcome to the parlor here in the mansion. When you walk in here, you see the mannequin of John. John, of course, his main claim to fame is he's one of the signers of the U.S. Constitution. All right, now when we enter this room, we are transitioning. We're leaving 1740, the original section of the house. We're moving into 1793. Again, as we come down the steps here, we are leaving the 1793 edition, the dining room. We are moving into the section that's added about 1830. So Mr. Dickinson never sees this because he dies in 1808.
We just got done with the mansion tour. Let's talk about John Dickinson, the man, and his political career, and the impact he had in the formation of our country. Starting in 1760, John Dickinson was elected to the Delaware legislature, and for the next 15 years, he would serve in Delaware and Pennsylvania's legislature. He was able to serve for both states since he owned property and was a citizen of both states. For context, the French and Indian War just ended in 1763, and it was from the expenses of this war Great Britain would levy many taxes on the colonists that led the colonists to revolution. The first of which being the Sugar Acts of 1764. The Sugar Acts were enacted to stop the smuggling of sugar and molasses and to provide more revenue to offset the cost of the French and Indian War. A major industry in the colonies was rum, and they needed to distill sugar and molasses to create rum. This legislation also taxed wine, coffee, and textiles. The fight for our liberty in the colonies has begun. You guessed it, another tax levied by the crown got the colonists in an uproar. It was the 1765 Stamp Act. This act imposed a tax on the colonies for printed materials to be printed on stamped paper affixed with a revenue stamp. It was in response to the Stamp Act John Dickinson would start his career as the penman of the Revolution. He wrote a political pamphlet called The Late Regulation, and here's an excerpt from that. We never can be made an independent people except by Great Britain herself, and the only way for her to do it is to make us frugal, ingenuous, united, and discontented. He would also go on to predict, with Britain's increasing oppression of the colonies, will drive them towards instead of away from independence. As you can imagine, the Stamp Act was unpopular among colonists. The saying "no taxation without representation" was coined, and the Sons of Liberty were created in the aftermath of the Stamp Act. A Stamp Act Congress was formed in 1765, also in response to these new taxes, of which John Dickinson was a part of. This was the first gathering of colonists to protest against Great Britain's taxes. After the Sugar Act and Stamp Acts, the colonists reached a fever pitch. They now had a voice with the pen of John Dickinson. The next crucial event leading the colonists down a road to no return was the Townshend Acts of 1767. The Townshend Acts taxed glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. It was in response to the Townshend Acts John Dickinson wrote one of his most famous documents that made him famous around the world. He wrote 12 letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. In his words, he argued that the British government had the right to regulate trade with the colonies, but the colonies were sovereign to regulate their own internal matters, including raising revenue. These letters helped turn opinion of the readers and spark rebellion. In 1768, he would write the Liberty Song, which was a patriotic song. The song is set to the music Heart of Oak, the anthem for the Royal Navy. This was one of the earliest patriotic songs in the colonies. It is this song, the earliest known writings of the motto, "United we stand, divided we fall," appeared. Now with the Boston Massacre and Boston Tea Party in the past, enter stage right, Parliament's reaction to the Boston Tea Party, the Intolerable Acts, which would punish the colonists for defying the Tea Acts. The road to war is hanging by a narrow thread. In response to these intolerable acts, the First Continental Congress was established between September 5th and October 26th, 1774, comprising of delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies. John Dickinson was a delegate from Pennsylvania. It was during the First Continental Congress he signed the Continental Association, which boycotted British merchants in October of 1774. The hopes were to hit the British crown where it hurts, the pocketbook, and they hoped they would repeal the Intolerable Acts. During the First Continental Congress, John Dickinson would draft most of the petition to the king. Still, the colonists, and more specifically John Dickinson, were interested in reconciliation instead of revolution. In response to the onset of the Revolutionary War, the Second Continental Congress was established. On May 10th, 1775, John Dickinson would serve as a delegate from Pennsylvania during the Second Continental Congress and would pen the Olive Branch Petition. In the Olive Branch Petition stated the colonists' loyalty to the crown to avoid an extended war. Many delegates, and the most notable that still believed in reconciliation instead of revolution, was spearheaded by John Dickinson, which is evident in the Olive Branch Petition. In the petition, John Dickinson claimed the colonies didn't want independence, but wanted more equitable trade and tax regulations. Dickinson would also revise Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms on July 6, 1775. It was in this document which explains why the colonies had taken up arms against the British government. In this document, it was written how the many grievances by the colonists have been ignored, and the colonists are still loyal to the crown. The only reason the colonists engaged in a war was quoted as, in defense of the freedom that is our birthright, and which ever enjoyed until the late violations of it, and will lay them down when hostilities shall cease on the part of the aggressors. End quote. During the Second Continental Congress, there were 3 committees formed to create a government, one to draft a Declaration of Independence, one to draft a model treaty, and another one to draft the Articles of Confederation. John Dickinson was the chairman of the committee that would draft the Articles of Confederation. The committee started on June 12, 1776, and it would take them over a year to send the final draft of the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union, which was completed on November 15, 1777, and it would officially be ratified on March 1st, 1781. The country's first government was established. And the last committee formed had the task of coming up with the model treaty, which John Dickinson was a member. This committee would establish a blueprint for all future treaties with other countries. The treaty was the newly found country's first attempt at diplomacy. They attempted to create alliances with Spain and France during the Revolutionary War. John Dickinson became the president of Delaware, the equivalent to a governor, in 1781, and the president of Pennsylvania from 1782 to 1785. He was appointed president of the Annapolis Convention in 1786, which was a convention with the intention of rectifying the issue of trade amongst the states. This convention was the precursor to the Federal Constitution Convention. John Dickinson was also part of the Federal Constitution Convention of 1787. Its main intention was to fix the issues within the Articles of Confederation. The main result of this convention was the drafting of the Constitution, one of the highlights of John Dickinson's political career, in which he was a signer of the Constitution. Delaware was the first state to ratify the Constitution on December 7th, 1787, which gave them the moniker of the first state. Hopefully after today's episode, if you made it this far, you have a newfound respect for a forgotten founding father, John Dickinson, who played an integral part in our country's founding with his pen that gave a nation a voice. I want to thank you all for watching. Until the next one.